Hello, everyone. Welcome to our new series. In this series, we'll try to gather as many freedom advocates as possible from all around the world to explain you what are the struggles these advocates face, not only these days, but also under COVID situation. And as well as they will share their invaluable tools and strategies that here in Turkey can learn from. The series is called Freedom Advocacy All Around the World. And right now, today, we are joined with Sven Gerst. Sven, welcome. Thank you for joining in.
Thanks, Ataberg, for inviting me.
Okay, so I'll directly start the interview. I am very much curious about the situation in Belarus. As far as I know, you're in Belarus right now, right?
Correctly.
Uh, and 100 days ago, approximately, there's been a questionable election in Belarus. I'd like to hear your thoughts. First of all, what the situation is over there. I read the other day from Euronews that they called the situation, current situation, as a dead end. But I am extremely curious about what your thoughts about, and do you think and do you consider this situation as a dead end?
Yeah, so let me briefly introduce myself. In the beginning, my name is Sven. I'm the Secretary General of the International Federation of Liberal Youth, which is the largest liberal youth umbrella network in the world. We are having 100 member organizations all around the world that work on the ideas of freedom in their respective societies. And over the last couple of years, I have worked with many different youth organizations, youth parties, NGOs, think tanks, civil activists, civil educators all around the world to try to think about how we can globalize freedom, because that's the motto of IFLARI. I also work as a moderator and facilitator for the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, and more specifically their International Academy for Leadership. So that's kind of my background. How I fit into this picture of advocacy for freedom, because this is a lot of the stuff that I've been doing for the last couple of years. And as life has taken me to Belarus these last couple of years, or more specifically, especially this year, where I'm like permanently based in Minsk, I can share a little bit of the situation that occurred mainly after the presidential election in August, because that caught everybody by surprise here, that it turned out that way. It didn't surprise anyone that the election was falsified. You said it's a questionable election. I would say it was outright falsified, in a sense that everybody knows that this election was rigged to like a ridiculous degree. Lukashenko claimed that he won 80% of the votes, while we might actually know that is almost like the other way around, that he has 80% against him. And this was then countered by protests, which then were countered by massive repressions that are ongoing. And currently we are in a phase where the protests are still ongoing, but they're losing momentum to a certain degree. So the protest itself losing momentum, which doesn't mean that the opposition to Lukashenko loses momentum. So when you are living in Belarus, you see that here everybody is resisting with their own ways. Like they're putting out the national flags, which is a symbol of resistance. They are not buying from government entities. They are voicing their dissent by wearing certain accessories that are associated with the opposition. But the political manifestation of the protests, they are toppling, like, or they are fading out to a certain degree, let's put it that way. And that's why a lot of people say it's kind of a dead end. And I wouldn't say that I necessarily agree. I think, of course, it's not nice to see that that the protests are fading out. But on the other hand, what do we expect? We are like 3 months into these protests. Do we expect people to go out 2 or 3 times a week to protest and then get harshly countered by massive repressions? And I mean here, for people to understand, really massive repressions. Like people are detained and then beaten in prisons, right? Like there are massive human rights violations ongoing. This is not like, okay, there are some like water cannons used against protesters. Here they have flash grenades. They imprison you, and they really wanna like ruin your life if you protest against Lukashenko. And at the moment, they have all the tools to do so. So it's not a dead end, because the society is politicized enough. It is coordinated enough to change things politically, maybe not from one day to the other, but there are things that people cannot turn back here. And that's why I wouldn't say it's a dead end. Maybe the protests aren't that big anymore, but it doesn't tell us much about how whether Lukashenko won or not. And I think that might help to contextualize a little bit what's going on.
Yeah, the fact that the protesters are fading away, it's not something that most of the countries are not familiar of. Here in Turkey, we saw that there have been many big protests, but then time after time, due to some many dynamics, it faded away. But one of the reactions of this, the fact that it fades away, it creates a short-term memory. After a little bit of short time, people tend to forget how important the protest was and how important and fragile the freedom was. Right now, I was wondering what civic society is aiming to do in the upcoming weeks and in months. Is it going to be continuously fading away, or will there be any other sort of techniques to revitalize the protest or maybe the advocacy for freedom?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things to say about this. First of all, people have to understand that civil society in Belarus is not comparable to civil society in many other Eastern European countries. Most notably, like people compare always like Belarus to Ukraine, like the Euromaidan protests and the Belarusian protests right now. I think the analogy lacks for various reasons, and one of the reasons is that civil society here is by far not as strong as it was in Ukraine when the protests happened. And so there is just no structure of political organization or civil society organization going on there, which I think is also maybe a considerable difference to a country like Turkey, where liberty and freedom is not only in political representation, but in civil society at least, it is well represented, right? So you have a strong civil society in Turkey, which doesn't really apply to Belarus. And at the moment, of course, they hound down all civil society. They hound down any form of political opposition. They have always done so, unsurprising. They hound down all the press that are critical. And now, of course, they go after civil society too. But again, since this is already weak, this is not a huge task, to go ahead. So people are very afraid, and people that also we have worked with as IFLRI, people are not participating actively in social life at the moment and are also detained. Like many of the people that we know have been detained and threatened, and they suffer from something that they call like protest burnout, like to be constantly afraid of being jailed or detained or used violence against, and then organized protests again, and find the motivation for that is something really hard on civil society here. So if I give this as a general overview of how the state of civil society is, I think that's pretty accurate. I want to mention one more thing though, because this sounds very grim. However, I think there is an overlooked structure emerging that I think many people can learn from, and this is the way they organized digitally. Like they are organized in so many decentralized Telegram groups nowadays, that it is very hard for the government to counter this action, and also it gives civil society kind of the space and anonymity to do certain things, right? So I mean, many people have heard about the Telegram revolution in Belarus and whatsoever. I'm sure it's a little bit overblown in the international media, but nevertheless, this digital infrastructure is what bolsters the current state of the protest and civil society. This will not go away. So this is an achievement to have created this. And this has not been here for many years. This was basically created in the last half a year, especially, I would say, as a response to the very bad COVID response by the government, where they then coordinated some crowdfunding and stuff. So this is kind of the new network of how civil society works here in Belarus. And I think this is something, a major takeaway for other organizations, how to organize yourself in authoritarian contexts.
It's amazing because it brings me to my next question. I was going to ask you, what are the new techniques, not only for countries like Belarus of authoritarian regimes, but also under COVID situation? And I guess Telegram is one of the answers for the question. I guess Telegram is one of the ways Russian communities also very frequently use, as well as far as I know. In Turkey, I cannot say we use Telegram as much, but I guess the idea of behind using Telegram tells us a lot. What would be the next techniques to pursue under such situation, and what else would you could you tell us next to Telegram? What other tools, online tools that we can use? What other digital advocacy strategies we can pursue? Have you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think many of the things about Telegram have to be contextualized because it was also not super big in Belarus beforehand, I would say. So they had other platforms that they were using. I think like in Turkey, you mostly use like WhatsApp. In here, they have a lot used Viber, since this has also been founded in the region, you know. So Telegram became so prominent because the founders of Telegram have an obvious political commitment. They are very anti-authoritarian and work in, as you mentioned already, in a Russian context very strongly, and therefore have these strong commitments to make the messenger kind of authoritarian proof that they can't play with it. And since internet surveillance and internet shutdowns became also a very heavily used tool here in Belarus, and I think you also now see that in Turkey, right? That this is more and more used by the governments. You have to rely on an infrastructure that cannot easily be shut down. And what they have done during the protests is they were able to shut down really different services through different methods. Like they were able to shut down Twitter, Facebook, and I think the same applies in Turkey, right? Like whenever something happens, they try to shut down, like amateurly, I would say in Turkey, but at least they try to shut down Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that. And with Telegram, you have a service that cannot be shut down. And then it offers also kind of a lot of functions that are good for public organization. So I recommend the tool. I use it also in my organization over other tools, not only because it's more secure or it's like authoritarian proof, but because it gives you a lot of ways to organize properly. It's like a sleeker version of Slack, and it allows you community management and stuff like that. So I would say this is one tool that could be interesting to people. And then for more hands-on civil society work, I think I learned a lot from using Discord servers, obviously. So I'm a gamer myself, so I'm very exposed to the communities, and I have seen over the years many different political communities using Discord more and more to organize their community, to share stuff, also to react very quickly to things that are going on. So if there's a Facebook post that deserves attention, this is something that unfortunately the alt-right understood very well. They could hijack certain Twitter threads, they could hijack certain Facebook threads, because they were always organized on this meta platform on Discord. And then they could also always jump into have like quick discussions on strategy and then jump out again. And it was like just community management. I think in COVID times, this became much more relevant for political movements and organizations. So you can do that on Telegram for bigger crowds, but you can do it with your smaller crowd on like Discord. And I think some organizations that are within your framework are using this already very extensively. You might correct me, but like Free Age has a Discord server and stuff like this. So community management is one thing that after right now. And then, as I said, for more political goals, something like keeping people in a messenger group is also something that has been highly proved successful in the Belarusian context. And I think we see that more and more. It has its downturns, of course, because you kind of create an echo chamber. But these are a couple of reflections that I have.
Um, Lovely. Actually, I am not one of the members of 3H movement. I am pretty familiar with their work, but I'm not sure if they're using it or not. But I guess in Turkey there are many societies, perhaps including 3H, that they are using online tools like Discord, Telegram, WhatsApp, and maybe some other tools as well. The question that brings me is whether these online tools are um, useful to reach out to the target audience, because in Turkey usually the audience that are using these applications are very young, and it is really hard to reach out to the older generations, and these are the people who are essential in the advocacy work in order to get the job done. It cannot be only the youth that can pursue the freedom, but also everyone should know their rights and then values it as well. So do you think it is useful in that regard, and maybe there are other methods that you can suggest?
Yeah, I think maybe the worry there is a bit overstated. I don't know how it is in Turkey, but I thought like what we see all around the world, also in Germany, where I'm originally from, is actually that these messenger groups are incredibly popular amongst all groups. Like only for young audience, or Instagram is for a younger audience. You see that a lot of people are actually using WhatsApp as their major source of information, right? So I wouldn't share that worry. Uh, I think really what you want to say is have in a COVID situation or a post-COVID situation, a stronger community building for civil society organizations, like having their ambassadors very closely tied to you, and like a community building entity, may it be Discord, may it be like WhatsApp or Telegram or whatsoever, is crucial to do such things. So I would say it's even much more. It's not the only component that you should do. So I don't say that you shouldn't do an advocacy campaign on certain issues, but always the basis should be good community management. And therefore, what we see in Germany, for example, is the rise actually of older generations having access to these messengers. So I would actually argue the reverse way. While certain platforms like Twitter are heavily biased by a specific education group and by young people, like messenger groups is like we say the Ford model, like, because Ford is bought by a very different target group than Facebook or Twitter user, and this is like the people you reach through like WhatsApp. And that just might be worth thinking more. What are the characteristics of the people that we want to reach, and then tie the medium to it. Because again, I think many of the people that you advocate towards, they nevertheless have smartphones, and they nevertheless want to be included in a community, and they don't want to attend Zoom calls or whatsoever, and they might even be not very sensible to an advocacy campaign. So I think community building is something that you can do with very little resources, and that could work over time very well. So these are just pushbacks to some of the concerns that people might have, because they always think like, okay, new technologies is always for like a young crowd, but here in Belarus literally everybody has like Telegram. So this is like going up to the babushkas or something, you know. So as soon as they have access, it's like incredible. You see it everywhere. All my cab drivers, they check the news through this while having the Yandex or like Uber app here open.
All right. I mean, right after this interview is over, I'd like to get some sort of sources on the fact that you mentioned that Germany, it's the other way around. Perhaps you have some sources to share me with that. The fact is, when the series is over, we try to gather the information as an outcome paper, and we'd like to share what the situation is in other countries as a written paper as well, so we can share it with many other people too. So it will be a great perspective indeed to see a reverse situation in Germany, perhaps. And I see, and I myself experienced the same situation in European countries as well. It's a reverse situation. Social media and online tools are more frequently used by the older generation, and the impact is a little bit more wider than here in Turkey. And so it would be nice to see what the situation is over there. And one of the advantages I
maybe just a question back to you, just a question back. Like, how do you communicate with your family on what platform? Do you call them? Do you text them, or do you have a WhatsApp group?
WhatsApp most frequently, yeah.
Yeah.
It is WhatsApp.
And so see, if your parents are already like, that's a good indicator that like actually we underestimate the power that already these platforms have. If you look, and I can share some resources on that, how the gaps actually in like the target group who uses like Facebook and WhatsApp over let's say Twitter is like just stunning. Like Twitter just represents such a completely different perspective, right? And we always put that all into one box, like, you know, all social media, but there's clear segmentation nowadays. I never go to Facebook anymore because nothing relevant to me happens there. It's like a boomer community, right? And that's I think in many societies evolving. And in Germany, this has actually a bad reputation because like Telegram is always used because of its bulletproofness to a certain degree by like the far right or by conspiracy theorists. And these are mostly actually boomers, you know, or like people who have older generations. So it is precisely, I think, the opposite trend.
One of my experience is that here in Turkey, the application is very much frequently used, but it creates a filter bubble, in my opinion. And in the certain groups are very much keen on using the application. However, the information is usually the similar to each other, and the information doesn't go out of the bubble; it's inside. So people are not able to reach out to different opinions and information, and it's really hard for advocates to spread the message out.
Okay.
So
I
it's
think
one.
that's a fantastic point. That's, I think, a fantastic point, because what I'm not saying is like people should have information channels or whatsoever, but what you want to really do is like community management. So I think,
Yeah,
you know, like
yeah.
engaging your community, looking what are the troubles, like having also participative modes. And these groups allow you to a certain degree to do so. And I think any successful community management does not only have a channel where they push out information, you know, but they really engage with the community there. And then I think it achieves the goals. So I think that that kind of exchange between the two of us got us to somewhere where I initially wanted to go, like community management as one thing, that in an isolated time like a pandemic is even more important, because you cannot invite people to an event anymore. And even if you do an online event, it doesn't create the bonds between people. So you have to think long term and maybe a bit more abstract. And therefore, I would push that a little bit more to the really raising attention. How do you do community management?
Exactly, and community management is a key point here. I can derive from the interview is um, the filter bubble is so gigantic here in Turkey, is that through only specific methods like community management, you can just um, try to break out these bubbles and then go into the other certain groups of the society. And this is extremely important. And it is something as important as using the digital methods. It is not only which method we will use or which application, but also how we will use it. What is
Yeah.
the main problem here is that uh, also this brings me to my next question as well. I mean, I was going to ask you, because one of the advantages hosting you as a guest is that your familiarity with Turkey, so you could perhaps open a perspective with similarities between Belarus and Turkey as a political situation. What would be the resemblances that you may see? I guess this is one of the not resemblance, but also difference, is that the community in Belarus is more gathered as an opposition than Turkey. I guess we are more separated within the society. What would you think about this?
Yeah, many different things to say. In fact, I often make the analogy between Turkey and Belarus, because I'm very influenced by Zeynep Tufekci's book on Twitter and tear gas, where she talks about civil protests. And I think what Turkey had with the Gezi Park protests is not so disanalogous to what happened here now with the anti-Lukashenko protests. And in the end, the Gezi Park protests don't tell the nicest story in the end. I mean, it tells a good narrative, and it is I would say crucial to understand modern Turkish politics. However, in the end, it didn't achieve the political change that it wanted to achieve, or that you could initially see there, and the same thing might apply to the protests here in Belarus. And I think she works out a couple of core features of what makes for successful protests out of other social movements out of protests, and what may be the failings of it. And so here are a couple of thoughts. First, uh, even though in Belarus and in Turkey and in anywhere, like social media makes it easy to organize people. So it is unsurprising that 300,000 people came on the streets after the elections in Belarus, because it's very efficient and easy to organize protests. I think similar in Turkey, right? To do that, because you have the communication channels, people are sufficiently networked. However, only such projects only fly in the end if they can transform these masses into what I call political capital, like in real long-lasting political change, meaning civil society, meaning political parties. And here, Belarus and Turkey share some similarities, but also some differences. The similarities are there is no real political capacity, like in a liberal democratic sense. Like you have some parties, but in the end, I wouldn't say it's fully developed as a liberal democracy. For example, there are certain ideological sets are not represented in Turkish politics. Like, for example, liberalism is not really represented with the party structures that you would have. So this is similar in Belarus, where you don't really have strong political parties. Of course, Turkey has still the major advantage of actually having parties. Here, this is a minor issue nowadays. And this is one thing that people should really take care of. Like working in civil society might often feel like, oh, we are losing or we are not achieving the goals we are setting for each other. But creating the structure itself is already incredibly helpful, because once there is the window of opportunity that happens, and Gezi was one window of opportunity, now the protests in Belarus are a window of opportunity, this only can transform into change if there is the structures. So sometimes that's frustrating that you don't see short-term results, but building the structures of civil society and political parties is crucial, because without that in the background, all protests will fall flat. And this brings me again to some observations about Belarus, because here in the end, I worry that you don't have strong political leaders, that you don't have political parties, that you don't have civil society. So all these people that are going out to the streets, they are falling flat in isolation. They only have one advantage, that is that they are united in one cause. And the one cause is anti-Lukashenko. So there are basically three demands of the opposition, like resignation of Lukashenko, release all political prisoners, and a stopping of violence against peaceful protesters. Okay, so that's very straightforward demands that they have, and that unites them. But this will not be around all the time, right? Like, what happens to when some of these demands are granted, right? Or who negotiates these demands? Like, this is incredibly complex. Without party structures, without strong political leadership culture, without civil society, you just don't have the structures to deal with such questions. And as I said, Ukraine had it at that time much more developed than Belarus and even Turkey, I would argue. So I think ultimately there are a couple of differences, a couple of analogies. Turkey has a, I would say, better political climate than Belarus, unsurprising. I mean, this year is nowadays proper fascism, I have to say. Turkey still struggles from an authoritarian leader, but in the end, it has a couple of advantages. First, it has some sort of awareness for political structures and people are working on it. Second, it has a strong civil society. And it is a very politicized culture. So people in Turkey talk about politics. Here, people before August really rarely talked about politics. Even now, they feel like weird talking about it at the dinner table or stuff. It feels like incredibly weird to talk about politics here. So they lack a lot of the stuff that people in Turkey already have. So you have a good fundament. I just think there are a couple of things that people need to work on more elaborately, like building proper modern political party structures, building modern civil society structures, also with the digital infrastructure that I talked about earlier on, and creating a political leadership culture itself. Like, you need not only these old guys. When I look at some of the opposition parties, I mean, this feels like mummies to me, like mummies in like the Egyptian style. So I think there is political leadership demanded that can carve out the next generation of leaders, and that's why I also try to do in my work, to focus a lot on leadership development.
The fact that you mentioned mummies, it feels like also I think the same about the civil society in Turkey as well, because their structure is really ancient, it's really old, it's really traditional, and it's one of the agenda of this series as well. I mean, it's not criticizing the authoritarian or libertarian regimes, but rather giving the great tools to pursue modern civic societies in order to achieve good community management, pursuing the agenda. So it'd be
And
nice to have this sort of environment in anywhere.
yeah, maybe let me jump on with a couple of thoughts on this. I think in the end, you also want to promote young leaders. Like, ultimately, I think in countries like this, where you still have a certain discrimination based on age, like in a sense that young people either don't feel comfortable or they don't feel generally that this is their role to take a leadership role in civil society, then you need to equip them, right? You have to make them feel comfortable and kind of raise awareness, like you, in such societies, you will not have to rely on the sudden moment that the older guys are realizing, okay, now we want to turn it over to the young people. Like, this will never happen. And in fact, that's a tragedy that we see all around the world, right? Like, management, CEO positions are the highest on average age that they have ever been. Like, look at the US presidential race. This doesn't come from alone. So we shouldn't wait until somebody hands over the task to us, but proper leadership development. And that's what I did here. Like, most of my seminars, online stuff, is something on leadership development with FNF Turkey. I did the Millennial Takeover, which was completely focused on youth leadership and young professionals developing their leadership skills in very concrete hands-on matters, so that they kind of dare to take leadership. So that's, I think, a crucial component that you just worked out there.
Amazing. So let us put some information and links, perhaps, of your Millennium Takeover work to the description, so perhaps people can follow up right after the series. Um,
Sure.
so before I wrap up, I'd like to ask first, what is your experience out of Belarus? Because I know that you're internationally recognized and traveling very frequently, at least before COVID, I can say.
Yeah.
So yeah, so what would you say about the experience right now all around the world? Your insight will be invaluable, and then I will ask the final question again.
Yeah, I mean, if civil society organizations or political organizations want to reach out to a young audience, you just have to understand how the cultural paradigms operate for, let's say, millennials or Gen Z or whatsoever. I always think about the following 4 points. Like, young people want to have freedom, so don't expect them to be fully committed to your organization. Like, we don't commit in our personal lives, and we don't want to commit to, like, one organization, one party, and then for the rest of our lives. Sometimes it's completely fine if you have casual people involved in your organizations, and you should be ready for this. That not everybody who gets active in your organization has to take on the full range of responsibilities. So restructure your organization that it can rely on more casual participation, right? And that's why I think community management is important. The next one is what I call impact. Impact is, millennial generation is almost like in a sense of a platitude, that they want impact to see, they want to see impact in their work. Of course, that's very hard to see in terms of politics because everything is kind of large scale. But always try to think, what kind of impact could I offer to the participants or to my young leaders, to people in my civil society? What could we achieve and where they could take credit for it? So always think, what kind of impact did we generate, like with this event, with this initiative? And once you articulate it to them, like, it will become much clearer to everybody what is their impact, why do they do what they do. Next one is, I would say, make everything that you do worth their time. Because people understand, especially the younger generation, like with anything that you offer nowadays online, you compete against YouTube, right? The most amazing platform of not only information, but also entertainment and like personal growth. Like, whenever you offer a webinar that is like third or fourth class, well, people will immediately understand it is not worth your time, because they can just go to YouTube and have the same experience, right? So either you make it hyper interactive where they can get personalized feedback and like voice their opinions and discuss and stuff, or you have a world-class expert, that they have like some backstage time. Like, really make it worth their time to grab attention. So this kind of make it worth their time is leading to my fourth point. Everybody in our generation does cost benefit analysis, and they have multiple areas that are linked to their personal growth. One could be academically, one could be, in terms of personal life, and the other one is like civil society. Why is civil society worth their time in terms of cost benefit? What do you add to their lives? Don't only see them as like your servant, but like help to grow everybody that gets active there. That's, I think, the crucial thing. Understand that people calculate their cost benefits. So this is the framework that I work with, and a lot of the stuff that we talked about is like circulating around this idea somehow, but I think that is more universally applicable than Belarus or Turkey or whatsoever.
Enormous, lovely. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And these are just golden sentences that I will probably try to highlight and mention everywhere as possible throughout the series, because it's incredibly key points. Because the civic society is just like a company. It needs to be run very professionally, very well designed. Thus, the people can achieve way more greater impacts in their community, I believe. So what you said is very invaluable, I believe. So it brings me to the final question. Thank you for so much for joining in. But before we wrap up, I'd like to ask, I personally believe in stories, and I'd like to get, since beloved Sven Gerst is here, I'd like to get one inspiring story that you can give us from Belarus. One can inspire the freedom advocates in Turkey to pursue further their endeavors on human rights, equality for all, justice. It'd be lovely to hear from you.
I, I mean, there are many different stories that you can tell from Belarus. Some of them are very grim, so I will pick up one that speaks just for the courage of people. I don't
Yeah.
know whether people are familiar with the story of Maria Kolesnikova, but Maria Kolesnikova became very prominent as one of the women that stepped up to oppose Lukashenko in the elections as part of the women trio that became very famous. And at one point, Maria Kolesnikova was kind of almost forced out of the country, and they tried to drive her like really to the border and like deport her to Poland. And then what she did was she refused to let her country back, like down, and tore apart the passport. And I think this tearing apart the passport just speaks for itself. If you're so resilient that amongst all the oppression, you still don't want to be deported out of your country because you believe that your country will be better in the future and that you will play a key role there, I mean, that tells you all. I'm somebody who works internationally, but that doesn't mean that don't have any loyalty to the countries or the societies that I am part of. I think that's crucial for civil society. You want to improve the society, you don't want to let it down. And tearing apart the passport when it gets difficult, this would be easy, to just travel to the next country and abort the project. But civil society is much more it's much more about staying and doing something and to improving. And this story is incredibly inspiring, I think.
And thank you so much. This is a great story. And I guess the audience will try to share it out as much as possible. Thank you for joining in us. And let's keep in touch. Perhaps we can have more to share with the audience in the upcoming weeks. All right. Thank you
Perfect.
so
Thank you
much.
so much. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Bye bye.
Bye.